Laptop, check. Cell phone, check. Internet connection, check.
The era of the digital business rockstar has arrived.
Live, work, and play anytime, anywhere.
Few have cracked the code. Today, you will be one of them. Now, from an exotic location somewhere in the world, business maverick and global lifestyle expert on a mission to help struggling entrepreneurs reclaim their time and lifestyle. Here's New York Times best-selling author, Daven Michaels. This is the Jetset Entrepreneur.
Hey there, it's Daven Michaels, New York Times best-selling author, 30-year business veteran. I want to welcome you to the Jetset Entrepreneur, the podcast and webinar for entrepreneurs that really want to live their life on their own terms. If you want to have a life that you dictate rather than a life that your business dictates for you, that's the kind of information that you'll get here every single week on the Jetset Entrepreneur. And joining me today is Ron Carucci. And Ron, I want to welcome you to the Jetset Entrepreneur. How are you?
Evan, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great, and I'm going to kind of introduce you a little bit more in just a moment, let everybody know who you are and what you're all about. But I figured I'd start this podcast by kind of sharing some with y'all. Oh yeah, and before I forget, everybody, if you're not currently a subscriber to the Jetset Entrepreneur, make sure you do so by simply going to iTunes, looking up Daven Michaels, Jetset Entrepreneur, and subscribe. And if you want to go deeper and get even more content, more webinars, more ways to grow your business, then simply go to davenmichaels.com, DAVENMICHAELS.com. Join the list, join the tribe, and we'll keep you abreast of all the cool things going on all over the globe. And I figured I'd start this Jetset Entrepreneur by doing something kind of interesting. I'm actually going to grab my mic here, and I'm going to go outside here for a moment. Today I'm coming to you from Vegas, and I figured I'd show you guys a couple of cool things and interesting things. So the first thing is, 65 years ago, the Riviera was built. And it's just world famous, so much history there. Well, today it is being taken down, and it is being demolished right before our very eyes. Just fascinating to watch. And so they started about a week ago. They've been demolishing it. As you can see, there's holes in the hotel. And over the next couple of months, they'll be imploding the two towers right there. So it's a trip to watch. But what I thought was really interesting, what I want to share with you is this. So if you look up here, you will see this huge tower, and that blue tower. And that is the Fountain Blue. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the Fountain Blue. So the Fountain Blue, we'll go ahead and come back in here. So the Fountain Blue is one of the highest buildings in Vegas. It is an amazing structure that was built. It was going to house, it was going to basically be a hotel, the Fountain Blue Hotel. And it was $1 billion project, $1 billion. That's a lot of money, especially for a lot of you entrepreneurs out there. And it was $1 billion project. And in 2009, they went bankrupt. And it's been sitting there ever since. Now, it's fascinating because the building, they were so out of money when they stopped the project that they weren't even able to cover the building. So the building is rusted. So supposedly they can't even build, they can't finish the building. At least that was up until recently. They couldn't finish the building. They couldn't demolish it because there's too much around it and it's too big. So they had two options. They could either take it down piece by piece, or they could build a big retaining wall all around the building and then possibly implode it. Now, the word is now that somehow they're going to be able to miraculously continue the building. I don't know how that's going to happen. But what I love about that building is that it is a shining testament to me that even massive companies can screw it up. Even billion-dollar companies, billion-dollar projects can screw it up. And I will even venture to say, and I have no statistics on this, but I will venture to say, I'm going to guess, that larger corporations screw it up more than small business people do. Now, this is the reason I'm saying this, is that, look, we know that small businesses go out of business all the time. So let's pass maybe the 3 to 5 year litmus test. But those companies that are around, I think the bigger companies make bigger mistakes, and the reason why is because it's not their own money. And I think it's a whole different animal when it's your money. And so that's why I thought it would be interesting to have Ron Carucci on the Jetset Entrepreneur with me. So I'll tell you a little bit about Ron. Ron comes into big companies and really helps them get back on track. So when the company is having issues, the company is failing, quite often, and Ron, we'll talk more about this and you can enlighten me, but quite often I know it has a lot to do with company culture, and probably a lot more too, and we're going to learn a lot more about that. So Ron is really kind of I'd say you're a turnaround expert, but you're a different type of turnaround expert. And Ron, can you share with everyone a little bit more about what you do and how you do it?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, Daven.
Yeah,
so I love the metaphor. It made me just squinch when you pointed out the waste of that building and how, especially on a strip that's so beautiful with such great architecture.
Yes.
So look, there's that thing that somebody decided, nah, I'm done with that. And the waste, right, and the carnage and the jobs that were lost. The endless ripple effects of such a horrible set of decision making.
Absolutely.
So we spend our days at Navalent working with all kinds of organizations. I think we have lots of family-owned businesses that are small entrepreneurial startups. We also have the large, big, global, multi-billion-dollar behemoths that we work with as well. But we enter as transformational partners. We're not the consultants that are going to go out and bring you answers. We're going to bring you the harder questions that you've been avoiding for a long time. We're going to bring you the mirror of data. We're going to go forensically digging into your organization diagnostically and get access to things you would never get access to. And we're going to bring you back a set of insights and perspectives told by your own people about what's the truth about your current story. Where does your organization really exist today? And where really are the challenges in the way of the aspirations you've set out to achieve and the obstacles to those that you called us about. Typically, we get called when somebody's in pain. We don't get called by clients saying, hey, things are going great, can you help us? They call when something's not working or I've been pulling a lever forever and nothing's going on. And so that's when we typically get referred to or called or looked up, or somebody's read one of our publications and thought, oh gosh, they understand my pain, let me call. And so we begin our journey. And typically that journey begins with a fairly deep diagnostic of what's going on. Sometimes buildings like that one you pointed out are the emblematic symptom of what we called for, but typically, the seeds of failure for that were sown well before anybody dug a hole in the ground in the strip. Long before anybody even had an idea for that hotel, the seeds of failure were sown. And I need to go back way upstream to understand where did you detour as an organization strategically that would have led you down that path. But we tell our clients all the time, and I would tell the owners of that building, your organization is perfectly designed to get the results you're getting. So if that's where that building ended up, their organization was designed to deliver that mess. If you're an entrepreneur that has 5 people working for you and you're struggling, your organization is built to struggle. And so part of the ways we get our joy in life is to help those organizations, large and small, reset a direction, reset the organization, and get back on the track they set out to get out, the journey they set out to get on.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you're absolutely right. When I think about that building, you're right. They were probably highly leveraged, and it was the height of the real estate boom, and then everything fell apart. And you're right. They were designed to have that kind of a spill had something like that, had a cataclysmic event sort of taken place.
And I think your point about big companies, which can often be soulless places to work, they didn't have to care about that. Right. Someone didn't feel any pain because of all that waste. And it's not just the waste, the visual waste, but jobs were lost, opportunities that
investors' money.
Yeah, that represented a huge opportunity of growth for a city that everybody knows economically struggles, right? You have a huge disparity of haves and have-nots there. It's a painful place. That could have meant one more difference in a positive direction. And the fact that somebody had the opportunity not to have to care is unfortunate.
Yeah, I speak to entrepreneurs all over the globe, but more recently I'm starting to speak to more and more large companies, and I'm hanging out with people in the C-suite, and the general consensus is, and you tell me if I'm right or not, is that in the C-suite it's all about self-preservation.
I would add a word to that. I think I see a lot of that. I also see a lot of self-protection. Mm-hmm. I think when we did our research for Rising to Power, we expected to find tremendous abuses of power through self-interest, through self-indulgence, And that was there, but that was not the largest abuse of power we discovered. The far greater abuse of power was not the abuse of it, but the abandonment of it. The fear of it, the unwillingness to declare directions that would prevent what happened behind you. Let's be honest. That was foreseeable, right? Someone didn't wake up one day and go, "Oh my gosh, it's rusting."
Right.
You know, rust takes about several months to form, so that was foreseeable probably before the crane went in the ground. And it would taken a courageous leader to say, "Don't dig," or "If you dig, we're going to finish no matter what."
Yeah.
But the exercising of that kind of power requires disappointing people. It requires making ripples. It requires disrupting the status quo, and for many leaders, that's too hard. And so they back away from that power, and that was the biggest abuse of power we found, was walking away from it, not overindulging it.
Sure, sure. Ron, let me ask you a question, because you said that you not only work with super large companies, Fortune 500 companies, but also small businesses. What's sort of the cutoff? What's your sweet spot?
Gosh, I think the challenge is whether you're in startup or scale up, whether you're an entrepreneur or somewhere on the way to executive, wherever you're on the journey, there are different patterns. And so I think where we cut in as surgeons is in a variety of places, and we bring a fairly wide set of tools and approaches that can accommodate that. The thing that I've recently fallen in love with is a group we call the Future 500. So they're just past startup, they're scaling well, and they're not $1 billion yet. But they're a $50 million company trapped in the body of a $10 million organization. Mm-hmm. Or they're a $100 million company trapped in the body of a $30 million organization. Mm-hmm. And they're just starting to hear the seams rip. They're just starting to feel the capacity constraints. Put that benchmark anywhere you want on the way up to a longer-term company. And those organizations I'm finding fascinating. There used to be those kind of mid-cappy kind of companies didn't want help. They were bootstrappers. They were on their own. Outsiders were not welcome. But I think they recognize they want to be part of the Future 500. They want to grow and scale. They're not looking to pump and dump cash and get out. They really actually want to go the distance and build great companies. I just wrote a piece about a company in Detroit called Shinola.
What's the company called? Called
Shinola. You may have grown up with an expression called "you don't know from Shinola." Yeah. But this is a company, the guy that Tom Cartosis started Fossil 40 years ago. They went into Detroit and started this beautiful products company. They went to Detroit intentionally because it has a history of great manufacturing and great design, and are building this fabulous company that's expressly to create jobs. It happens to design beautiful products, but it's being done to create jobs. It's an amazing entrepreneurial story of why people create sustainable, great companies. And I think those organizations are now far more open to help. They're far less predisposed to think I have to do this myself, consultants are evil, I don't want to be a big company. And they're far more curious. They're far more willing to recognize that, hey, I am a $100 million company in the body of a $30 million company, or I am a $10 million company in the body of a $1 million company. And that's not a good thing. And I'm watching my people, the G-forces hit their face, and I'm watching the makings of potential catastrophes. I probably should get after that. And so it's a far more enjoyable journey because, to your point about the Fortune 50 C-suite, sometimes you find the jerks there too. Egos the size of Montana. They're not particularly nice. They think they already know all the answers.
Right.
So they're a little bit less enjoyable to work with for us. Sure. And I'm finding this fascinating population of leaders and organizations doing phenomenal things, having started phenomenal companies that no one's ever heard of, but doing great work, highly sustainable, with great potential to go long distances. And they're so much more fun to partner with. They're so much more fun to go on that journey with.
That's cool. What does Shinola do? I'm just curious.
They make, it's such a fun company. They make beautiful timepieces. So what a great, they went to the Swiss, a craft that has not been seen on the shores of the United States in 30 years. And so somebody said, you're going to make watches in the United States? So they got the Swiss to make the parts. They had the Swiss come over and train the workers. And they're developing craftsman timepiece makers in Detroit. They make leather products. They're about to go into audio. They make beautiful bicycles. They resurrected the Schwinn factory and are making beautiful bicycles. They have beautiful flagship stores all over the country. And just a great bunch of people who are committed to making manufacturing jobs at scale in the United States.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really cool. You know, I think long-term that some manufacturing is coming back to the U.S. I think a big chunk will, but I think it's going to be different. I think it's because of, 3D modeling and 3D printing and what have you. So I think there'll be a lot of automation, but I think a lot will come back, so.
Well, 60,000 jobs came back the last couple of years. We're making progress. What can be done? There's lots of people out there trying to figure out how offshoring can be reshoring. The piece in Forbes is called Insights for Entrepreneurs on Scaling Their Organizations. And hope your readers go check it out.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. So, Ron, let me ask you a question. So how do people find you?
Gosh, a couple of ways. So I think people will read. I write for HBR, I write for Forbes, written some books. Referrals. A lot of our clients love telling their fellow CEO friends about us. So we'll get calls from somebody saying, hey, Tom called me and said, you helped him, can you help us? That's another common way. Or I'll be speaking at a conference or some leader will hear me speak and say, hey, that sounds like something we're about to stumble over, can you help? So those are common ways.
Sure. And let me ask you this. So let's say you're speaking at an event, somebody hears you. Let's say I'm a CEO of a $100 million company, and I want to bring you in. How do I bring you in and not admit that there's a problem, right? Because me as the CEO, that's real, isn't it?
Well, for some leaders, and I think one of the things we're learning, Daven, is that we have to learn to say no to some clients. Not every client is meant for us.
Yeah, we did say.
And, leaders who are trying to hide something tend not to be great clients for us because we're going to go dig it up. So if you got skeletons buried somewhere, tell me now because I'm going to find them, and I'd rather give you the opportunity to talk about them versus having to bring it to you. So I think most secure leaders who recognize that enterprises, regardless of the size, are complicated, messy things. And you're not supposed to have all the answers. You're not supposed to be able to fix all the problems. But you are responsible to name what you're seeing. You are responsible not to go into denial about what you're seeing. And if people are crying for help, you're responsible not to try and dismiss that. And outsiders can raise issues, see things that insiders can't or politically don't find it safe to. And so we can go in and hold up all kinds of mirrors. People tell us things they would never tell their bosses. And so I bring back 70, 80, 90 pages of forensically deep conversations that you as an executive would never get access to were it not for my ability to package them this way. Now I've got the truth. Now I've got the voices of your top 20, 30, 40 leaders candidly and painfully talking about what they're seeing, experiencing, where they're in conflict, where there's contradictions that are unreconciled, where you as a leader are being a jerk. Now we can have an honest conversation about how to fix it. I guarantee you, had that construction company talked to us 3 years ago, we could have prevented that catastrophe. We could have helped them. And my guess is that they ran out of money. Well, that wasn't probably the problem at all. If you had enough money to start that project, you probably had enough money to finish it, downturn or otherwise, right? My guess is that money was not right. That project.
Sure, they probably end up realizing that that it was a bad investment. And they probably jumped ship.
Yep.
Yeah, that's crazy. Interesting. So we did talk about that. There's different types of companies that would utilize you. But just so I'm clear, just so people know if maybe they have a company that's experiencing turbulence, $2 million and up company you could work with?
We've worked with companies as small as $10 million. Okay. We also work with some nonprofits that are smaller than that.
Sure.
I think 50 million to 300 million is a range we're common in, and then the 3 billion to 30 billion is another place we're common as well.
Perfect. So if you're watching the podcast, many of you watch this live on the webinar, or if you're listening, there's a lot of different people that listen to the Jetset Entrepreneur, and they range from small business to very large companies. So if you're a very large company and you're thinking of maybe talking to Ron, Ron's company is Novolent. But if you're a small company, there's going to be a lot that you're going to be able to glean from this podcast, because we're really going to talk about over the next short while. We're going to talk about what's the process? How do you get in there and troubleshoot the issues that are going on in your company? And if you're a small business, maybe you can't afford Ron, you can certainly pick up his book, which is called Rising to Power, the Journal of Exceptional Executives. And so we'll tell you how to get that before the end of the podcast. But also we're going to kind of share some insights and some ways that you can troubleshoot your company as well. So Ron, when you first go into a company, what are the steps? What are you doing?
Well, like I said, we begin with a fairly forensic diagnostic, so I'm going to go unearth all kinds of data. I'm going to do some really deep interviews with 20 or 30 top thought leaders or opinion leaders in the company, and then I'm going to amalgamate all that. We have a fairly robust content analysis software that helps us do pattern recognition, and we have outside coders that code the data, so I can come back to the executive with a really robust look at things as they are today. It's like the MRI and the CAT scan all in one of the organization. And typically, we're looking at the organization systemically. I'm not looking, you may have come to me with some presenting symptoms, our margins are eroding, I can't get the strategy executed, executives are leaving, we have turnover issues, I can't retain top talent. There's some pain point. We have three failed product launches in a row. But usually that whatever the pain point is obviously is something symptomatic of something deeper. And typically the things you've tried didn't work, and so I don't go hunting there because they didn't work. Inevitably, especially in smaller companies and startups, one of the questions we ask about is, so tell me about your strategy. Tell me about the direction you've set for the organization. Tell me about its aspirations. And I'll inevitably get some wonderful counterfeit. I'll get the mission statement. I'll get a financial plan. I'll get the product quotas. I'll get the Costco orders. I'll get the sales quotas. I'll get some other metric or device that is a counterfeit strategy. And when I say, that's interesting, that tells me what you want to accomplish or what you want to sell or how much you want to make in the next year or so, it doesn't tell me who you are and why you're here and why anybody would choose to do business with you over somebody else. So tell me, who are you saying no to? Who is your competitive set? What are the investments you're making to differentiate yourself, and why are those differentiators critical? What gives you a right to win in this competitive set? What are the capabilities you have to be better at than anybody else in your competitive set, and what are you doing to get better at those things? What are they? And inevitably I get blank stares. The fundamental work of identity building, the fundamental work of here's who we are, here's who we're not, here's who we serve, here's how we serve them, here's where I'm investing money to get there. Not done. They think that the business plan they handed the angel funder, the business plan they handed the bank for the loan, the kitschy vision statement they wrote at the hotel count as something. And you know what? I fully appreciate that for many entrepreneurs who will roll their eyes hearing that thing, but we're too small for that. That's a big company stuff. And I would say you're wrong. I would say the questions of fundamental competitive identity are ones a person who's a one-person employee should be answering. I get that for the first couple of years it's fluid. I get that the market's going to teach you about its response to yourself. It's going to teach you about how it consumes your products or your services in ways you didn't foresee, and you should be able to adapt, for sure. But after a couple of years, you should be wise enough to be able to begin to put some swim lanes in place, chalk your field, stay in the lines, and focus the resources. But for many entrepreneurs, that's too painful. The most difficult word for an entrepreneur to say is no. And so when you're saying yes to everything, you have no strategy. You don't really have a direction and an identity for your company until you've said no to something. So I need to get that clear first and foremost. I need to be able to answer the fundamental pillars of identity, competitive differentiation, and capability to know if you're even viable to win, and even if there's a marketplace that even cares about you and will choose you over others for the reasons you want to be chosen. Once I clarify that, my next question is, okay, do you have the organization built to deliver that? Because if you don't, then we have to build the organization, and I say that word holistically, so I'm talking about culture, people, processes, systems, governance, structures, all of that, the collection of stuff that is an organization that is designed expressly to live out the strategy you've set. But if that strategy doesn't exist, you're going to have a collection of activities that's nothing but a chaotic free-for-all, which in most entrepreneurial companies, that's what you find. You walk in and it's like an anthill. People just running around crazed with their hair on fire trying to get the next order out the door or hoping the phone's going to ring.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember last year we decided that this was going to be the year that we were going to say no. And we did say no for a few months, and then we started saying yes to everything again. But we do try to say no sometimes. We just don't have the bandwidth for everything that gets offered to us, It's pretty crazy. So let me ask you a question. So, well, first of all, how long does that process take, the interview process, the analysis? How long does that usually take?
It can take anywhere from 8 to 15 weeks, depends on how wide we cast the net, depends on the availability of the executives we want to talk to. So there's a number of factors, but usually 8 to 15 weeks. And then the work begins around whatever the data unfolded or whatever was revealed as. Here's the fundamental questions of identity and organization that have been not addressed or are derailing you. We'll begin a process of some kind to get after resolving those.
Gotcha. Ron, one of the things that I know that when I go out and speak, I teach, I empower, and I like to think that I make a difference in people's lives. And I do, but the reality is I make a difference in about 1% of those people's lives, because only 1% of all people take any sort of action, whatsoever. So here's my question for you. So you put all this time in, you create the strategies. How do you get them to implement what you create?
Well, and the answer is in that we don't create it. We don't come in and give you an answer or solution. We're the Jillian trainer. We come in and we're hard asses when it comes to we're going to do this work with you, not for you, and certainly not to you. And so we don't create the strategies. We bring the tools and the devices into the room and make you do the work. Setting strategy is a leader's job. It's not a consultant's job. Identifying the parameters of performance and competition is a leader's job. It's not a consultant's job. Building an organization and architecting the fundamental capabilities that can express and execute that strategy, that's a leader's job. It's not a consultant's job. I can show you how to do it. I can do it with you. I can bring you the tools to do it right and not superficially, but it's yours to build and it's yours to own and it's yours to implement. And so for us, we go the journey. We don't come in, sprinkle stuff, and then leave. We spend 2-3 years with our clients on that journey alongside them, making them build and implement the answers to the painful questions they called in the first place with.
I think that's really wise, because one thing that I've definitely learned over the years is that people support what they create, right?
Yes.
Not what others create for them, right? So I think that is really good. Yeah, that makes sense. So Ron, one of the things I love to do, I love to meet entrepreneurs, business people, CEOs who've really been able to create, greatness. And I'm a super inquisitive person. If we hang out as we're hanging out right now, I'm going to ask you lots of questions. I love people. I want to know more about what they're up to. And so I'll dive deep and I'll say, how did you turn around that company? How did you take that company from where it was to, back then with nothing, to where it is today, employing thousands of people and so on and so forth. And there's always this underlying theme, and that underlying theme is culture. I hear it over and over and over from every high achiever that I meet, every book that I read on those high achievers. It's always about culture, culture, culture. And we've seen it in our own business. We're a small company. We have about 400 employees, but we're growing pretty rapidly. And we've created really goofy, silly, fun culture. We work very hard, but we also play hard. And I remember just in the C-suite alone, I brought in one person a couple years ago that didn't match our company culture. I did the hiring there, and I messed that one up. And it was literally like the whole C-suite kind of grinded to a halt. It was just ridiculous until I got rid of that toxic person. And the person wasn't that bad. They just didn't match our company culture. So can you speak a little bit to company culture and how important that is in what you do?
So it's a great question, Daven, and it's funny how many counterfeits there are for culture. I mean, you throw that word out there, and it has such a wide array of meanings. And if you look into behavioral sciences behind it, it's misused a lot. So many people think I write a set of company values, I stick them on a wall, stick them on a screensaver, stick them on a mug, put them on a T-shirt. That's my culture.
Right.
And most leaders fail to realize you just created a weapon of mass destruction. You've now put into people's hands the very thing they're going to use to undermine you by telling you every day how you contradict and hypocritically don't live by the standards you set.
Interesting.
Because what you did is you put them on a wall. You didn't embed them into the organization. We value teamwork. We value fun. Okay, show me your compensation plan. Show me your governance structure. Show me all the places you've made that to be true. Show me your strategy. And so culture, the debate in behavioral science is it a means or an outcome? Is it the byproduct of building the organization and hiring people you want, or is it something you intentionally create? And it's such a stupid debate because the answer is both. You have to intentionally build it, and it is an outcome of what you build. Many leaders don't understand that culture isn't something that just forms because you hired fun people, or because you are in a certain kind of industry, or because you're a certain size. Cultural norms form among sets of people intentionally or unintentionally. You get to choose. And I think those organizations that are very intentional about the things that shape behavior. So if there are a predictable set of things that shape the behavioral choices of people every day, and that's essentially what you look for in cultures. Well, how are people behaving? And so the way you set direction, the way you make decisions, the way you allocate resources, the way you set direction, the way you hire people, the way you train people, those are predictable levers that will make people choose to behave in a certain way. And either that way is consistent with the values and the norms you want, or it's not consistent. Too often there are certainly bad hires where you hire someone who's not a fit. But too often companies use that as an excuse where they didn't want to do the work to help somebody on board, so they weren't a fit, and so they get exported. And the reality is, fit is a truthful indicator, but you can know that on the way in. The reality is it's also an excuse not to help outsiders succeed. Because cult-like cultures emerge when you are impenetrable to outside thinking, right? And so hubris is a cultural norm that nobody wants to admit. We're so full of our own stuff that we don't want outside thinking, right? But people will say, oh, we're a confident culture. Or people will say, we're a really friendly culture, which is really code for we don't have any conflict. We can't disagree. People will say, we're a loyal culture, which is really code for don't upset the boss, right? So we can name it anything we want, but a lot of times it's dishonest. It's deceitful. So true culture, the work to shape a set of behavioral norms that isn't about people enjoying themselves in the organization. It's this is who you said you want to be in the marketplace. This is how you said you wanted to differentiate yourself and compete and win. What are the behaviors that are required for that? What kinds of people, what kinds of choices behaviorally should they be making that drive that? The culture should be in the service of the strategy, not in the service of we like art here, or we like each other, or we're cool, or people don't quit here, or we get the best talent. That's all well and good. But if those things don't drive performance, they're fairly useless. And so the thing we look for in a culture is, A, was it intentionally created, and if so, how? And B, is it aligned to what you say strategically you want? So for example, if you're going to now play in multiple categories of products, right? Immediately what that tells me is that you have a set of capabilities behind those product categories that are leverageable, because you can't repeat the same stuff for every category. That immediately tells me you need collaboration. Because to work across boundary lines of different distribution channels, different ways you're going to send products to market, how you're going to innovate products, I better be seeing people who truly want to work across borders and are not siloed. If I go and find a compensation structure that rewards highly individual behavior, if I find that the way you hire is based on individual achievement, if I see people who are not particularly inclined to collaborate or resolve conflict with each other but are going to go up and over to the bosses, if I find people who can't share decision rights and negotiate trade-offs, I'm going to show you big risks to the strategy of being in multiple categories, right? So writing on the wall, we value teamwork, is all well and good. And I can see why in the strategy you've chosen, you need people who can collaborate really well. But if you've done none of the work to build the organization that promotes, sustains, trains, and encourages collaborative work and discourage individualism, then I'm going to tell you didn't really do the work.
Interesting. Very interesting. So, Ron, let me ask you a question. How did you end up getting into this business? How did you? I mean, you got to know a lot to be doing what you're doing. So, how did this happen?
Oh, I wish I asked myself that question every day. I began my career in a very different field. Early on, I left college in New York City and went to go work for a nonprofit because I wanted a break from what I was doing. And I went to work in a nonprofit consulting firm that worked with prisons and schools and all kinds of nonprofit organizations, using a variety of media to go and work with those organizations. And I discovered, while working with the U.S. military and the State Department overseas, we were doing some work. It was, interestingly enough, it wasn't called diversity and inclusion back then, but in essence, it was the early work in the 80s of valuing differences. And we were doing a project on that, of all places, at Dachau. At Dachau.
Oh, Dachau.
Yeah. So ironically, between Germans and Americans, military and civilians, on what it meant to, to live together, to work together, to be in community together, because they were struggling. And one of the soldiers immediately, at some point during the program, we were talking about the conflicts between those various factions, and he got very emotional and said, "I'm just so tired of being trained to hate," which opened up for me, right in front of the workshop, a really fascinating conversation, which we continued later at a pub. And that was I don't know that we have seminal moments, but it was a really important moment for me to realize it wasn't the presentation of content that really brought me to life. It was the conversation. It was not just the dispensing of thought, but the engagement of that thought and watching somebody metabolize it. The point you made before about people not implementing what you say, that would have driven me crazy. And I realized that the behavioral science I wanted to pursue was being an agent of change that others would adopt. And so I began to shift my career then in my mid-20s toward organizational behavior and organization development, and spent a variety of years working inside companies, and found out that my nasty habit of telling the truth didn't do so well inside companies. And what my kids came to love as severance packages, because that meant more time with Dad. What got me handed one of those got me paid very handsomely outside organizations. So I finally decided I need to take the hint here and realize that you can't be a prophet in your own land, and that the way I'm going to make companies better places to work and make them more prosperous, thriving places is from outside of them. And so I went and began my own company to do that.
That's really cool. How long ago was that?
11 years ago. We started Daven.
Nice. And I would presume a company like yours, I mean, you probably have less than 10 clients at any given time, right? It's probably... Yeah.
We're a small, intimate firm, and we go deep with our clients. And so these are not fly in, fly out. These are long journeys with our clients, and so we have to preserve our time and choose our clients wisely for the ones we feel like we can have the greatest impact with and go a good distance with.
Yeah, I'd love to have 10 clients. That would be a great model. So you talked a little bit about counterfeit, and I guess it's like people believe one thing, but they really have no clue quite often. Yeah.
I think these are entrepreneurs who are well-intended. They believe I invented something. I created something. It's my baby. The other problem that you have with the counterfeit identities is they're not willing to admit the fact that their own personal identity is severely too linked to that thing they made, right? So I am my product. I am my app. I am my service. I am my thing. And so you now immediately hamstrung your ability to scale, because the minute you start to scale up, your inability to let go, your inability to step away is so challenged that you actually suffocate the very thing you created. And most entrepreneurs don't see that happening, despite how many case studies we have of it. And so I think they think, gosh, Costco called, put a new line in the garage, we got to make more. They think that's a strategy. And it's so exciting. Now money's pouring in the door, or some angel funder just wrote them a big check, or their one particular service is taking off. They're getting good press. It's a high. Who would not want to ride that, right? And so the fundamental work of identity isn't an intentional deceit, exercise. They're not trying to consciously deceive themselves or their employees. It's just they ride the wave that comes behind them and never step out of working in the organization long enough to work on the organization. And no one tells them, hey, you got to stop. This is all well and good and great, but it's not going to sustain itself. You need to stop, call time out, and ask yourself, is this bus driving you or are you driving this bus? And most of them don't realize the bus is driving them.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, we're always talking about working on the business as opposed to working in the business, and no matter what level you get to, this can happen. The reality is if you have a large company and you've done things right, you actually should be working less than you worked in the early days.
You know, that's a great should, but the point you made at the very beginning, Daven, was true. Big companies, no matter how big, are no less prone to those compression things where you have the top dipping in the middle dipping in the bottom, and it's all rather than. And one of the challenges is even as you scale an organization, when you go from being in a big company a director to a vice president, which is really the journey of what we wrote about in Rising to Power, because 60% of those executives fail within the first 18 months. That's unconscionable that we allow that to happen. So we went back 10 years to research why is that happening and why are we okay with 60% of them flaming out? Because that moment when you go from being sort of in the top of the middle of the organization where you're coordinating lots of stuff to being at the top, where your time horizons change, where politics change, where your peer set changes, where people who used to be your peers, now you lead them. People who were your bosses are now your peers. Where your measurement systems are different, where your navigational systems are different, the altitude, the air is thinner. No one says to you, just so you know, now that you have this title in this bigger office, here's the 8,000 things that are different now. And you're unprepared. You're unprepared for that ascent, and you're unprepared to stick the landing for what it takes to actually thrive there. And so the compression happens even in big companies. And so part of our data was, for the people who are rising and sticking and not flaming out and going the distance and doing great things, what do they look like? What are they doing? How is it they're being so effective? And that's, I think, what it was we were able to decode in our research. A look at the executive who can rise, play at the highest altitudes, and make a great difference.
That's pretty awesome. If you're just joining us, this is Daven Michaels with my guest, Ron Carucci, and welcome to the Jetset Entrepreneur. And if you're not currently subscribing, you want to make sure to subscribe on iTunes. And if you want to go deeper and get even more content on different ways to grow and scale your business, go to davenmichaels.com. That's DAVENMICHAELS.com, and opt in, and you'll get a ton of great content and goodies. So, Ron, let's talk a little bit more about your book, Rising to Power, the Journal of Exceptional Executives. First of all, where can people get a copy if they want? Is that up on Amazon? It's
up on Amazon. It's on our website, www.navalent.com. There's a tab for it. It's all over the internet. There's some HBR articles about it if you Google it. So lots of places available.
Awesome. Great. So tell us more about the book. Tell us about the research that you did for the book and what you found, and enlighten us.
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking. So, the statistic I mentioned a little bit earlier about 50 to 60% of executives failing in the first 18 months of appointment, that's been that way for 20 years. That statistic has not moved. I think we just accepted it as normal. We got a 50-50 shot. But when it started to be our clients, Daven, it got personal. When CEO would call us and say, hey, I'm paying you to help this guy. Why is he flaming out? People who from the middle of the organization looked highly promising, great talent, had a great track record, were suddenly being elevated or imported in, and with great fanfare, catastrophically failing. And so we went back 10 years. We had 2,700 interviews of data. We isolated 100 executives who were actually mid-ascent and followed them for their journey of ascent to uncover all of the landmines. And the surprise to us wasn't that 50 to 60% were failing. It's wondering why any of them are succeeding. When you look at all of the incredibly dangerous landmines organizations put in their way on the way up, and the highly different skill sets and requirements of life at the top compared to life in the middle that nobody had told them about. It was amazing how 70% of the executives told us they were not prepared for the roles they took on. They had misassumptions. Their organizations had not coached them. There was no ongoing coaching once they got there. It was astounding to us how how many of them, with great belief, thought they were doing the things they should be doing to get up there? So here's a simple example. How often do we hear people being hired for a certain experience because they've done it before? Oh my gosh, you built a great sales force. Come do that for us. You turn the supply chain around. Do it for us. Wow, look at these brands you built. We need our brands built. Sounds reasonable. It sounds like, wow, I've got the experience you want. It is one of the greatest setups for catastrophic failure. Why?
Wow.
What I'm presuming is that you have a formula, that you've got a recipe for doing that work, and you're going to bring that recipe here.
Right.
So I enter the organization, I whip out my recipe, and I start slapping it on the organization. Guess what? Doesn't work, right? Because I have not read the context. I have not looked and seen how does this environment need to change me in order for me to change it. I'm just coming in as the Messiah with a halo on my head, slapping my answer on, getting organ rejected by the organization. And the harder they resist, the harder I slap. Then the organization begins to back away and withdraw support. Now that halo becomes a noose. And the very organization I came to help, I've now indicted by judging them, by saying things like, how have you people made any money? It's worse than I thought. And I bring the armies of consultants in, and now I got a war between the old guard and the new guard. It's a classic scenario, plays out every day in organizations. Doesn't have to go that way. So that's just one of a dozen examples of landmines you have to traverse on your ascent to a senior level role. The great news is, once you're there, how you stick and how you make an impact is very codifiable. So we found 4 really powerful things. The scary part was that the executives that were succeeding did all 4 well. It was not 3 out of 4, 2 out of 4. They did all 4 of these things brilliantly well. And the good news is they're all learnable. The first one was context. They understood the industry they were in. They knew how they made money. They could read the cultural tea leaves. They studied context, and they adapted to it. The second one was breadth. So if context is depth, if they grew up in a narrow discipline, how many executives grew up in marketing or finance or sales, get to the top, and they don't realize they've gone from playing first chair to being on the conducting podium. So now the most important thing you have to understand is how all the pieces fit together and what's at the seams of those pieces. So you have to let go of your functional biases or the business unit biases out of the business you came from, and you've got to learn the whole end-to-end organization and how it all synchronizes. That's your work. Many leaders fail to do that. The third one was choice making. So as I mentioned before about the leaders who struggle to make hard decisions, these were leaders who could construct brilliant choices. They could assemble the right data, the right voices, and the right intuition, and make hard choices. They weren't afraid to make choices that disappointed people. We tell our clients all the time, leadership is the ability to disappoint people at a rate they can absorb. They construct great decision makings. And the last thing they did was they had amazing connections. They had relationships that of deep trust. Every company has that guy or that woman that everybody wants to work for. These are them. With their direct reports, with their peers, and their superiors, they had fabulous, trust-based, mutually beneficial relationships. So those 4 things are all learnable, and if you master them, you will ascend and stick and thrive.
Very good. So just to recap, that was context and then depth, correct? Breadth. That's what. Okay. Just want to be sure on that. Breadth, and then choice making, and then an amazing book of contacts.
Yeah, connections, relationships.
Yeah, interesting. I love it. Fascinating. I'm always amazed at the executives that do make it, that do pull it off, because, everything is against them, right? There's politics, there's, like you said, getting into the C-suite and having everything be totally different than what got them to that level. So I'm always astounded by the people that are able to do it.
It's a great point, Daven. I get frustrated when people resent them. Sure, we publish their compensation packages, and some of them are paid way too much.
I admire them.
But we should admire them. These are ruthlessly unforgiving jobs. They're difficult jobs. They're fraught with risk. We think they're full of perks. They're not. If the one thing I tell is that leaders who are aspiring to the top, if you don't understand, if you get one of those jobs, you're going to suffer. You are going to suffer. If you're not ready for that, don't try and get up there, because the worst thing that could happen is you might succeed. And if you're not ready for the pain that comes with those jobs, you shouldn't pursue them.
Yeah. Fascinating. So, Ron, for your book, did you do some case studies?
We did, yeah. We have a number of organizations in there we looked at that either represent some of the catastrophes or beautifully represent some of those archetypes of success.
Yeah, can you kind of share or paraphrase or give us some highlights of a case study?
Yeah, sure. So in the section where we describe breadth, context, choice, and connection, one of the organizations we looked at was the seat leader was Hershey, the Hershey Company. At the time when Dave West was leading it, he was a fabulous example of breadth. He had grown up through the organization, had been there 11 years, but he understood how brand building worked and how it was a combination. This is at a time when the Hershey brand was suffering. This is one of the most iconic stable of brands in America, and they were struggling. The stock was at about 40, and he knew how to build the organization, how to configure the assets of sales, marketing, innovation, R&D, and trade spend in a way that turned those brands around. And when he left CEO there, the stock was over 80. He also did all four of those things well. He was a humble guy, had great relationships, knew the industry really well, knew how to construct hard choices, but his amazing understanding of the breadth of the organization and where he'd been in it helped him configure the assets in a way that completely transformed the organization.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah. Well, awesome. Ron, this has really been enlightening. I want to thank you for sharing with our audience. I can't believe how quickly the time passed. I want to thank all of you for joining us on the Jetset Entrepreneur. Once again, if you're not a subscriber, make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes. And if you want to go deeper, get a whole bunch of great information on different ways to grow your business, scale your business, dial in your marketing, and really live the lifestyle of your own design, simply go to davenmichaels.com. That's DAVENMICHAELS.com and opt in, and you'll begin receiving all kinds of great stuff, and you'll get to come sort of backstage and check out the Jetset Entrepreneur Live as well. Ron Carucci, I want to thank you for being with us. His book is Rising to Power, the Journal of Exceptional Executives. I love the title, and you can pick it up by going to Navalent.com and Navalent.com, Navelent.com, correct?
Navalent.com.
Navelent? Got it.
No,
okay.
Navalent.com.
Got it. .com. And of course, you can go to Amazon as well and pick up the book. I want to thank you for being with us, Ron, and I want to thank you all for being with us. And until next time, this is Daven Michaels. Live your true life adventure. Bye for now.